President Biden says he's prepared to compromise on his big new government programs. But is that possible, considering he and Republicans are trillions of dollars apart? Joining us now from Louisiana, Bill Cassidy, a member of the Gang of 10 Senate Republicans looking for a deal. Senator, you just heard my conversation with Cecilia Rouse. Your reaction?
There's a lot in there which is easily disputed. She talks about big government being essential to vaccine development. Pfizer did not take federal dollars, for example, to get that vaccine. It was the Trump administration and Congress giving regulatory flexibility. I would argue the era of bigger government coming back will thwart the progress we need to make. And I think we can see recent history about how that is exactly true.
Let's look, though, at some of the key provisions in the president's jobs plan and in his family's plan. And I want to put them up on the screen. $100 billion for workforce development, $400 billion to care for the elderly and disabled, $225 billion for child care, and $200 billion for free preschool. Senator, which of those programs that I just put up, which of those programs do you think people in your state don't need?
Every one of those programs should be evaluated. If it's important, it should be advanced. It's not infrastructure. When people say, wait a second, I like this because we need a new bridge across the Calcasieu River in Lake Charles, I'm saying this plan will not give it to you. The amount of spending for roads and bridges is so low that, and split between 50 states over 5 years, you're not going to get your bridge. Now, we may need this. By the way, we just are restarting our bipartisan working group to come at family support for the dependent, children and elderly. But that is not going to give you a road and bridge, and that's what people in my state would really like to see.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, and you know, we could argue, and I have back and forth with both sides about infrastructure, but there are a lot of programs that aren't infrastructure, and the question I'm asking you is, would you support the government paying for them? I mean, I looked into it. In your state of Louisiana, the rate of child poverty is 25%. 1 in 4 of the children in Louisiana are in poverty. And according to the White House, 42% of residents in Louisiana do not have access to child care. So wouldn't they benefit? Forget whether it's infrastructure or not, wouldn't they benefit from these government programs?
So I don't know if they would. If you think about the main driver of elevating out of poverty, it's good education. Now, what we saw in the pandemic was teachers' unions keeping schools shut, even when the Centers for Disease Control said it was safe to go back. The president wants to give universal pre-K, run by the same teachers' unions. Now, if you're in Chicago and there's more money going to the school systems and to the unions, and yet they still won't open, not because the CDC says it's not safe, but because they don't want to, your kids are not going to have a better education. They're just not. So whether or not these programs benefit those who need it, we don't know, because it's going through a system which is so poorly served these same folks we wish to help.
As I talked about with Ms. Rouse, there's not only a disagreement about spending, there's also a disagreement about how you're going to pay for it. And one of the main Republican objections to the Biden plan is it would undo much of the Trump tax cuts. But I want to take a look at those tax cuts. According to the Tax Policy Center, the average first-year tax cut for a household making less than $25,000, the average tax cut was just $60. The average tax cut for a household making $3.4 million was $193,000. And contrary to talk that it will pay for itself, the Trump tax cuts are now projected to add $1.5 trillion to the deficit over 10 years. Senator, of the 2 million tax filers in Louisiana, only 14,000 of them were paying more, filing gross income of more than $500,000. So what's wrong with raising the top tax rate to where it was during the Bush 43 and Obama administrations in order to help the working and middle class?
If all you do is look at first-degree effects, Chris, you can make a point like that. It sounds just like President Biden speaking to Congress. And I'm not accusing you. I'm just pointing that out. If you look at the overall effect, the aspiration of this Biden administration is to return to the economy we had before COVID, where we had record low unemployment, which means record high employment for African Americans, veterans, women, Hispanics, the disabled, high school dropouts, with wage growth disproportionately in the lower quintiles of the income structure. That's where we were seeing the economy really help. Now, that was all part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill. You can't separate them. And so if you want to say, my gosh, these people are making more money, why don't we return and keep the Tax Cut and Jobs Act? That's the flip side of the question you're asking. And I think that flip side is the part that should be emphasized.
But the argument is, and there certainly is some data to indicate, that the Trump tax cuts benefited the wealthy and corporations more than they did the working and middle class. And I want to play a bit of what President Biden said to Congress on Wednesday. Here he is.
The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is.
The president says that his plan is going to help the working and middle class by making the corporations and the wealthy, people over $400,000 a year, pay more. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, so if you raise, academics would say if you raise taxes on corporations, you have lower wages, you have less investment, and you hurt shareholders. Think pension funds. Now, if it's okay to have lower wages for working people, it's a blue-collar thing. If it's okay to have less investment, it's a blue-collar thing. But if you want higher wages, if you want more investment, if you want more efficient deployment of capital, then it's anti-blue-collar. We saw under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill a blue-collar working bill. Investment, increased wages among the lower quintiles of Americans with fuller employment. That's the recipe for success, not taking trillions and trickling it through Democratic interest groups and hopefully some of it getting down to the folks that you know you want to help.
All right, so let's get to the bottom line here, Senator. After talking to you and to Cecilia Rouse, you're part of this so-called gang of 10 of more centrist, more moderate Republican senators. There's also a gang of 10 Democrats who are trying to work together to get a deal on infrastructure specifically, but I suppose also on some of these family plans as well. Given that you're so far apart, trillions of dollars apart in spending, given that you're trillions of dollars apart in taxes, what are the chances for a deal here, a bipartisan compromise deal?
Well, first, let me push back. We've got conservatives and progressives in our group. It's just that we're willing to speak. And I think if the definition of moderate is what you traditionally is, it's better to say conservatives and progressives coming together to find common ground. Now, in terms of being far apart, we're far apart on the scope. If you're talking about a scope, which is roads and bridges and internet and tunnels and airports and waterways, we can be pretty close. If you're talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars to benefit public service unions, then we're far apart. So if we can agree upon the scope, we can fix those bridges in Louisiana and elsewhere. And I would argue the administration needs to kind of be honest with the American people. If you really want roads and bridges, come where Republicans already are. If you want to give us permission to do a lot of other stuff, well, that's a different story. But roads and bridges, we're a lot closer than you might think.
Senator Cassidy, thank you. Thanks for joining us this weekend. It is always a pleasure to talk with you, sir.